All right, thank you so much. Welcome to another episode of the Love, Hope, Lyme podcast. My name is Fred Diamond. I'm the author of Love, Hope, Lyme, what family members, partners, and friends who love a chronic Lyme survivor need to know. I just want to state that although I'll be talking to a doctor, this show does not replace medical treatment. If you're struggling with your Lyme disease and other co-infections, please go seek proper medical care. I want to remind people that if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, thank you so much. Go up, give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate it. If you're watching this on YouTube, Dr. Winfrey, as hundreds, if not thousands of people will at some point, go up, give us a thumbs up, ask a question, give a comment. We'll definitely reply to you at some point. I want to also remind people too that the PDF, the e-version of my book, has been free for chronic Lyme survivors from day one. Just reach out to me on social media, either Facebook or LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to send you a copy of the e-version, the PDF. Dr. Winfrey, we've sent out close to 5,000 copies of the PDF, and the book is always available on Amazon. If you'd like to get some signed copies, Dr. Winfrey, a lot of people have bought a dozen copies to give them to family members. Just reach out to me again via Facebook or LinkedIn, and we will be happy to get those to you today. So I'm very excited. My guest today is Dr. Chris Winfrey from the New Image Wellness Center. And I'm excited for what we're going to be talking about today. Dr. Winfrey, a lot of Lyme survivors struggle with a lot of the mental health side of it. And we've done some shows in the past. Of course, we did a show with Dr. Robert Bransfield that is one of our most downloaded shows of all time. So I'm excited to talk to you. We're going to be getting kind of deep into a lot of these topics, but we're also going to be covering a lot of things today. We'll talk a little bit about traditional psychiatry and how it works and other approaches that you're taking at New Image to help chronic Lyme survivors. So first off, it's good to see you. Why don't you give us a brief introduction and tell us how you serve Lyme survivors?
So, to your listeners, I'm Dr. Winfrey, and I'm board certified in psychiatry. My practice focuses on a couple of different things, and part of my practice is geared toward forensic psychiatry. Part of my practice is geared toward consultation and education, and then a large part of the treatment arm of my practice deals with some basic cases of psychiatry and then chronic complex illness. I think I kind of got into this sort of work the way most people do. Either some people do it through personal experience or just having complex cases that seemingly are perplexed and difficult to resolve. So for me, I just kind of found that rabbit hole of having questions and being curious and trying to figure out what is right and what is true when I exited residency. And so I kind of stumbled upon this path, and I found that a lot of patients that I've been serving have all these underlying issues that were called one thing or were thought about in a certain way. So that's largely how I got into this path. And then through my own personal story of working in an office that was pretty moldy, for about 6 years, that really had a significant impact on me, that really propelled me to really dive into all of this work to figure out how to get healthy and recover.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, a lot of people listening today, of course, are struggling with mold. It's something that we've covered a couple of times on the Love Helpline podcast. All right. So when I was going through your materials, your prep, and the website, you have a pretty bold statement there about the unseen toll of chronic health struggles. And everybody who's listening to this, 95% of the audience are chronic Lyme survivors. In some cases, they've had Lyme for decades, if not scores. Talk a little bit about some of the implications of chronic health struggles, things such as, you say feeling stuck in the system, disconnected healing, wearing down over time. Give us some insights before we start getting deep into some of the ways that you treat these.
So the outcomes of treatment that we really want to think about are not necessarily scales and scores and reduction in symptoms, um, whether or not you're in remission or not. Those are all just kind of terms to kind of speak to a treatment process, a way of communicating from one provider to another or to an insurance company or some way of kind of getting some large scale metric. Um, but if we're thinking about each other as humans, what do we care about as humans? We care about if we can love. We care about if we can play and recreate. We care if we can go to work. We care if we can find and experience purpose in life and fulfillment. And we care about being able to have family and have relationships. Those are, to some degree, the more important outcomes that we want to measure. And those are the things we really want to think about as what we were shooting for in the long term and at the conclusion of a treatment and along the way. And that when someone has a chronic complex illness, we see one or more of those things I just listed as being significantly impacted. And then therefore, we get into the conversations about quality of life. I regard this work as very important because when it comes to trying to unfold and become who you are in this world, when you have an assignment that you need to complete, when you have somewhere to be, and that you have someone to be responsible for, you need to be at your optimal best. And that we have many people that are not living up to potential, have unrealized potential, have castrated thoughts and feelings about what they can be and what they can do because of these chronic complex illnesses. And so for me, when we're talking about being stuck in the process, being stuck in your life, we often find that these are some of the issues that are behind stuckness, stagnation, or just chronic frustration where you feel like you're not getting ahead in life. Now, whatever you call it, however you might think about it, these underlying issues are oftentimes at play and are significantly impacting, people's lives. Whether we're talking about healing family dynamics, being able to have crucial conversations, these things are oftentimes at play, making it very challenging for people to navigate through and get to where they need to be and who they need to be.
That is an amazing answer. One of the reasons why I wrote the book Love, Hope, Lyme was because I found out how many relationships were terminated because of a person having a chronic illness, specifically Lyme, and coupled with the co-infections. And you just raised a great point. I mean, I know a lot of people listening to this want to be healthy, but the reasons that they want to be healthy is to have purposeful relationships, being able to work, right? I was originally going to call the book Love, Loss, Lyme, but in speaking to so many people with chronic Lyme, everybody has some degree of loss, relationships, livelihood, love, unfortunately, in some cases. So I love the way you said that. And let's get specific into some of the ways that you can treat, because I know a lot of people listening to the show today, one of the reasons why they listen is for ideas and paths to take that they haven't taken before or that they should consider taking. And I see this come up all over the time in the various social media platforms like Facebook and Reddit and Instagram. People asking, what is this? Is this something I should do? Has anyone else done this? So let's talk with, the most common one, traditional psychiatry. Talk about how that may play a role in recovery.
So when I think about traditional psychiatry, I think about thinking about things at a very basic level, not necessarily always thinking about mechanism of what's driving the sort of issue, whether we want to call it anxiety or depression or trauma or insomnia, things of that nature. And the large part of psychiatry deals with safety. Safety in terms of issues like suicide and self-harm, safety in terms of aggression and violence, and then safety in terms of just being able to have proper insight and judgment to make reasonable decisions for your life, and things of that nature, whether they be influenced by external or internal measures. So the large part of psychiatry deals with safety. And then in my training, we had so much work on safety more than any other sort of specialty. And all the medicine deals with safety to some regard. I mean, even your surgeon, when they're going into the operating room, they got to make sure everything is safe. And so the bulk of what we do is about how do we establish and understand and maintain safety. And to some degree, all of life is about that. And so we have guardrails when we're driving down the road, and we have traffic lights and things of that nature. So having a good framework in psychiatry kind of lends very well to thinking about this sort of process, because we want to make sure we should set up parameters and things that we maintain safety along the way. So that would be the first thing I would say that's really critical and key. The other part, that how most people think about psychiatrists and giving out medications, and certainly medications have a role. In mild cases, medications can be wonderful, and sometimes mostly what people might need, and then they can recover and come off medications. Sometimes when things become more moderate or severe, not only do you need medications, you're going to be bleeding over into looking at having one of these sort of chronic issues that people need to begin to think about. So I think there are some of the limitations with just only using traditional psychiatry, that medications can only help with reduction of the intensity of a symptom. It rarely resolves any problem that a person has. Um, and so that needs to be a factor when people going down this sort of treatment arm. They say, well, can I just take a medication or something? I think people are not quite educated on the difference, that none of these medications will resolve or solve an underlying systemic or system issue.
Wow. So you mentioned a couple other specific areas of psychiatry that we haven't discussed before that people may want to be aware of. Metabolic uh, or mitochondrial psychiatry. What are those, and how many people want to think about that?
So coming back to the thinking about traditional psychiatry, where we're thinking about, okay, if you have anxiety, we want to try to use some medication to calm that down. If you're having depression, we want to try to use an antidepressant or so. Well, the thought about those medications, at least in theory, is that those medications should be able to impact something like your metabolism by regulating your hypothalamus, which is where your sleep and your appetite and different things are being largely regulated through hormones and different things of that nature. It also was thought that they played a role in regulating your immune system, and also played a role in regulating your mitochondria and energy production, and other sort of areas such as, your thyroid. So if you're talking about raising serotonin levels, there's supposed to be serotonin levels in all these sort of areas. That was a largely a theoretical thing. It's a nice idea and concept, but it's not that straightforward. And so these medications were pushed out as being able to regulate all these sort of things. And then all you need was one medication, and it was to help all these particular areas. Well, it turns out that was more of a marketing ploy. And so for many people who are not familiar with the history, when they first started marketing um, medications, they came up with the ingenious idea that if we can just get people to take this one medication and sell them that this one medication will really, really restore everything that's going on with them, they'll get buy-in. Because no one wants to hear two and three and four or five things. One sounds much better. And so people hadn't really realized, when you watch commercials on TV, they show you a person, same story, in a dark corner, not doing well, look like they're on the verge of death. They go and get this one medication, and they're totally restored, and they're outside in the backyard playing frisbee with their dog. The dog is always some high intense dog. They're barbecuing, and they're having a good old time. That's a marketing ploy. That's to draw you in. That is not reality. And they came out, for example, when one of the first benzos, Cyrax, marketing to middle-class white women who were stressed out by all the cleaning duties, and how Mother's Little Helper would help her feel so much better about managing everything. And so they sold this sort of paradigm of thinking, and it's been with us ever since. And it's misled so many patients when they come in and say, why do I have to do all this? Can't I just take a pill? They are unaware that that is propaganda, and they've been unconsciously programmed to think that that's the way it goes. So when we get into thinking about the underlying issues that are driving the train, metabolic medicine and mitochondrial medicine suggests that, hey, if we really think about not symptoms and categories, and fancy things like neurotransmitters, like that's like down the line. If we go back to just the basics of the cell, what does that cell need to operate? Every cell needs basic things: fats, proteins, carbs, your B vitamins, your magnesiums, and things of that nature. And it needs things that's going to help that cell function. It needs things that are going to help that cell detox. And if you, in some sense, think every cell in the body has those basic ingredients in common, and some cells are a little bit more specialized to do a different function, but at the end of the day, they all need magnesium. They all need vitamin D. They all need your B vitamins. And so if you start there by trying to support the body with what it needs at a basic level, you can cover a lot of ground. So for me, when I'm working with patients at this point, when patients used to come to me, I used to think it was, you just got to jump in their antibiotics and different things to help them. So when patients come now, my first thought is, how do we optimize the mitochondria?
Hmm.
Because what I found, there were two things that patients all had in common when they first came that was most important to them. They were tired and fatigued, and they was confused and couldn't think. And so I said, well, how can I help them with those two things first, before anything else, because that will get them to buy into the treatment more. So when patients are coming in the door, I'm really going after how can we get their energy up, and how can we promote more clarity of thought sooner than later before we do anything else. Now, if there are some special cases maybe where a person has C. diff or something and they have 25 bouts of diarrhea a day, that might need to be resolved first before we do anything else. But something like that being aside, so I want to think about how do we boost energy. So I'm really big on getting the adrenals up and going. I'm really, really big on getting thyroid up and going, and then putting in a lot of mitochondrial support. And in addition to that, I'm really trying to make the push now, which sounds a little odd for many patients, why a psychiatrist would be saying it. I need to get my patients in the gym doing strength training.
Hmm.
This is an under-recognized important issue in chronic complex illness, and particularly things like Lyme and mold, because those things significantly target the muscles. And the three areas of the body that has the most mitochondria is going to regulate or demand most of your energy. Number one is your heart. Number two is your brain. And then number three is your muscles. And we can quickly influence the number of mitochondria in your muscles than any other area by exercising and by strength training. Now, some people don't take this serious and they think, well, I don't really need to lose any weight or anything. We're not talking about weight loss. We're talking about building your mitochondria. And that's a different focal point. And there's a misconception in America that we need to be thinking about losing weight. You will lose weight in the process, but we're more concerned about building muscle because that's tied to longevity, and it's tied to brain health, and that's tied to mitochondrial health more than just about anything else. And so it's critical that people do that and get that understanding. Now, when I see a child, let's say early adolescent, they said, well, the child is slumped over, they bent over, they have poor posture, they look, they don't care, don't want to be there. That might be Lyme unaware. Why? Because one of the things that Lyme does is it hits the muscles and makes them weaker. And it particularly hits the dorsal muscles that's going down the back side of the body, the back, your glutes, your hamstrings. And so a lot of kids are slumped over because their muscles are so weak, it can't give them an upright posture. And so they're misinterpreted as being disinterested. And so therein lies, not only do you struggle with confidence internally, but even people's perception of your confidence and things, because of how Lyme is impacting muscle health, is significantly tied to this sort of concept of muscle health. So I think these are some of the ways I'm thinking early on. How do we get the muscles improved? Getting them in the gym, getting them with a personal trainer, because they don't need to figure out itself. It's complicated science. Let somebody else who's already done the work help guide you through it to make it easy so you can use your energy to think about other things.
One quick question about that. So I know people were probably listening and saying, I'm so fatigued I can't get off the couch, let
Good.
alone to the gym. So what will be your advice for them?
So that's why the first thing we're doing is getting your adrenals up and going. You can't get
Okay.
off the couch if you don't have cortisol. That's
Okay.
number one. Number two, you can't get off the couch very well if you don't have your thyroid up and going. You got to get that up and going. You can't then get going if you don't have nutrition. You put about many people in these conditions are not eating.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have to eat, and you have to eat the right sort of percentage that's going to be conducive to you building energy and things. And then you have to be on the right supplements and things that's going to all be geared toward making energy. So you have to have CoQ10, you have to have magnesium, you have to have vitamin D, you have to have B complexes, you have to have things like NAD. So there are a lot of supplements that people can take when they're first starting the process. The supplements and the treatments that I care about most is the ones that's going to drive energy. Now, why am I focused on that? Because the most important treatment to all of what we're doing is oxygen. Oxygen is the most important treatment. It's the definition of life. You breathe is the first sign of life, and the last sign of life is when you stop breathing. And oxygen is critically needed to make energy. So we need to get oxygen up and moving in your body, moving around, and we need to make sure we have iron and all these things in place so that your body can process that oxygen to make energy. Energy is the most important thing to this whole entire treatment because you need energy to sleep, you need energy to wake up, you need energy to move, you need energy to detox, you need energy to fight infection, you need energy to love, you need energy to process your emotions, you need energy to think. You can't do this treatment without energy. You can fight the infection all day long, but if you don't have energy, it's not going to work.
Yeah, everything is energy. I want to kind of set a little bit of the table here about the brain, right? And why and how Lyme affects the brain. So, you often say that you work with survivors to really rehabilitate the brain and restore mental functioning. Talk a little bit to give people an understanding about how Lyme does affect the brain, and then then give us some insights into why rehabilitating it is so important.
So let me just piggyback off that last section. So one of the number one ways Lyme impacts the brain is it hits the mitochondria. So when I get an EEG on a person, one of the treatments that I do is TMS. And so before we do the TMS, we get an EEG. And on the EEG, we get brain waves. And brain waves will tell me if you're in delta, theta, alpha, beta waves. And so I would like to see a person have alpha wave activity while they're awake. Now, if I get this EEG and a person has significant delta and theta waves, which are slow waves, that tells me that their brain is not processing energy. And that also tells me that there's damage to nerves. So if you are in delta wave activity, which is 1 to 4 hertz, alpha waves is between 8 to 13 hertz. That means you're walking around as if your brain is asleep. When you sleep, your brain slows down and it's oscillating. The nerves are firing really slow between 1 and 4 hertz. So that means you're walking around, you're trying to process life with a sleepy brain. That's one of the major things that Lyme does. It puts you into a dream-like, sleepy-like state, and you have what people call brain fog, or they have slow process or poor cognitive processing speed. And so you're in the conversation with your spouse wants to talk to you about something, and you're processing it so much slower, and your spouse says, "Aren't you listening to me? Did you hear me?" It's like you're not paying attention to me. What are you're not paying attention? Don't you love me or whatever? And you get into these miscommunications, or let's say you're in a social situation. It's 6, 7 people in the group talking. Everybody else's brain speed is much faster. They're going boom, 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 boom. And yours is kind of like, and the people have now moved on to the next conversation, 3 or 4 conversations down. You're still stuck on the third conversation back. So processing speed is tied to mitochondrial function, and it's tied to nerve cell and health and damage. One of the next ways that Lyme impacts the cells is by damaging the cell membrane. Now, what is a cell membrane? If you have a water hose, the hosing part of this is the casing like of the membrane and the myelin sheath around the nerve. And Lyme hits that and knocks out the myelin sheath and knocks out the membrane. So if you imagine taking a water hose and you poke holes all the way down the side of it, then the pressure that's going to come out the end is going to be significantly less. You're not going to have as much water coming down the end because this water is seeping out the sides. And so if you're trying to fire your nerve and you're trying to get a strong signal, and this is sometimes why medications don't work because the nerves are so damaged. You can go in and stimulate with serotonin all you want, but if it can't send a signal down the nerve, then you can just stimulate with these medications, you just don't get anywhere. And so I can see on the brain, on the EEG, where they have low voltage. And so your cells have a voltage and a charge like a battery in your car. And when you knock out the mitochondria and you knock out the cell membranes, you can't hold charges. So you have a low voltage brain, and that means you don't have much energy and bring power to function. And so now you have 2 kids, 3 kids, you have a job, and you have all these responsibilities, and your brain just can't mount the power and the energy to go out and do the things that you need to do. So now you're overwhelmed. Now you're running behind, or maybe you're calling it ADHD, or you procrastinate. All these different ways that we're trying to name it and describe it. These are some of the underlying issues. The other sort of ways Lyme hits the brain. When the baby's born, the brain is forming. It starts from the back to the front. So you develop the posterior part of the brain first, and then you start making the central part, and then the frontal lobe is last. And that's also how the brain myelinates, coming through adolescence into adulthood from back to front as well. Now, if you take somebody who's had Lyme congenitally or early in life, now you're going to be messing up the nerves in the brain, and so you don't get stable or very well functioning brain developing. So one of the areas that's significantly hit with Lyme is the frontal lobe. And if you get hit early in life, you don't even get that sort of developmental, um, that sort of progressive developmental changes. And so what we can see sometimes on the EEG is that the back part of the brain has higher voltage and is firing much better. And then the front of the brain, the charge is dropping off. So what does that mean? You have information that's trying to come from the back part of the brain and it's coming to the front and it's dropping off. Well, what kind of functions in the front part of the brain? Decision making, organization, impulse control, personality, morality, um, attention discrimination, so many functions. And so when you're talking to a kid that's having Lyme, for example, and the parent says, hey, I want you to go and take the trash out, and you've had to tell them 5 and 6 times, they're not processing very well. That's not them just being rude and defiant. It's a significant processing issue. And so, or if you're needing to make some really um, important decisions, you can't process through very well. So the last part I would say, the limbic system that Lyme hits. The limbic system is what's driving a lot of your emotions and regulation. For many people that can remember themselves thinking a certain way, and then now they think different. They say, I don't know why I'm thinking this way. Something changed. Lyme hijacks your brain, and particularly the limbic system. And it's changing your emotional responses in the program of your thoughts. Emotions drive thoughts. And so if you can hit the emotions, you hit the thoughts. And Lyme can make you think all kind of things you wouldn't normally think if you didn't have it. It hijacks your brain. And so when people get into aggression, sexual issues, and other sort of thoughts that are perverse or challenging that many people are ashamed of admitting that they think, they're unaware that they have something like Lyme in their brain that's hijacking the brain and thinking these sort of perverse thoughts. They're not their own thoughts. And so I think for many people, working with them is really trying to help them to understand no human being naturally thinks about killing themselves. That is not a human thought. I'm going to say that again. For evolutionary purposes, we have so many checks and balances to preserve ourselves. We're not going to think about annihilating ourselves. That doesn't make sense. So something has to be there that's changing the brain circuitry to make a thought like that possible. And so for many people that are confused thinking that these are their thoughts, I'm here to tell you it's not.
Yeah. That's a powerful thing. So how does the brain repair itself? So let's say you're in that state where you have these types of thoughts. Um, how do you, is there a way to get rid of them? Is it time? Is there, I don't know, sleep? I mean, what is the strategy to get out of that particular space?
So one of the things I like to, invite people to think about this sort of work is difficult and it requires a lot of things to get to a place of stability and resolution, and back ultimately to functioning, high functioning. I want to ask people, if you're going through this sort of experience and challenge, not to take any treatment off the table. Only take treatments off the table if you really can't afford it and if the treatment just didn't work with you or something like that. I think sometimes I see people take treatments off the table based on ideology and politics and all these other sort of things. It's too difficult to treat to just be taking things off arbitrarily that doesn't really have any weight behind it. Why I say that is because you need several things to get through this process. Coming back to that one drug model, this is not that sort of situation. So you need everything on the table and every arsenal at your disposal. When we're talking about repairing and rebooting, we do have to get the bug out of the body. We also have to get the inflammation and immune system under control. And then we have to repair the damage to the cells. And we have to make sure that we have all the repair mechanisms in place. So we need things like phosphatidylcholine. We need to make sure we have all your micronutrients that your brain needs to regulate, like zinc. Um, we need to make sure that we have proper blood flow and that we repair blood vessels going to the brain. We need to make sure that we have proper hormone communication to the brain that's been restored. Um, and then lastly, once we kind of get like all those things back in place, so the structure of the brain, the architect, the communications to the brain, the regulators of the brain, then we need to make sure that the rhythm of the brain is being restored in terms of all this sort of chaotic energy that's been going on. We need to make sure that the left side and the right side, the front and the back of the brain is all talking at a similar sort of frequency. And that's one of the last things I will bring in, something like TMS, which stands for transcranial magnetic stimulation, where we're trying to rewire that brain frequency like a conductor at a symphony, making sure that all those instruments on one accord.
Wow. That's a great answer. There's so many other ways we can go with this. So maybe we'll have you back on the show at some point to get a little deeper into that, because I know I've met so many chronic Lyme survivors who struggle with this. And it's like, I like the way you described. Um, it's not that it's out of their control, but it happened, right? It happened because, you were bit by a tick, and this is a result potentially of chronic Lyme disease. We're talking to Dr. Chris Winfrey today. Dr. Winfrey, we have time for one more question before I ask you for your final thought. I know you believe that faith plays a big role in healing. Um, I know a lot of people who are deep in faith, and I know a lot of people who have let go of their faith. Give us some thoughts on that, and then I'm going to ask you for your final thoughts.
So there are different ways we can think about faith. Obviously, most people are going to go to religious faith when they think about faith, and that certainly is a component of faith. And then there is, at a very basic level, just human faith that has a lot to do with your early experiences in the first year of your life and how well your body's regulated and been taken care of. And so we see at the end of the first year of life, whether or not the baby has faith that, hey, this world is going to be good to me or not going to be good to me, is a critical and foundation developmental milestone. And so for many people, and in particular if they have like congenital Lyme, the first year of life is difficult. And because of that, there's so much chaos, there's so much aberrancy and arrhythmias, mistiming, lack of attunement. To establish faith in the early baby and infant at that stage is very difficult. And that sets the stage for other developmental stages in life that become challenging. And so, here in a very basic way, for me, faith is my ability to see and imagine something that has not yet happened, to see and imagine something as possible when I hadn't yet seen it. I don't have evidence for it. Trust says something different. Trust says I've consistently seen something,
Hmm.
evidence. And so now on the 10th time this thing has come around, I trust that it will happen. So trust is built on consistency and evidence. Faith is not. And so therefore, for a person that's going through this process, they've never seen anybody in their family get better or well. They haven't seen any close friends. They may have heard something on the news, but because it's so far off from where they are and who they are, and they can't find any personal identification, they may struggle with this because you need to hear the testimonies of others to build faith. And so, can this person see and build a future self that they have not yet became as a guiding vision for this treatment? And if they can't do that, it's going to be very, very challenging to get them better because they need something to grab onto that's much bigger than where they are so that they can keep aspiring and moving and therefore have that motivation to want to continue each and every time. So that is critical. And I think when I talk with people who struggle with faith, struggle with trust, they struggle with connection with people, I find that those treatments are going to be way more complicated because they don't have those sort of basic intangibles they need to move forward. Now, there's a lot of studies that look at, faith as being significant in regulating your stress and your hormones and your immune system. And those that are more pessimistic and nihilistic, they have much more of an inflamed body than those that have faith. And so I think I'm not trying to tell people what to have faith in and how to structure it, but the architect of faith in itself is really critical to this process.
Yeah, it reminds me of the of the Henry Ford quote: "If you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right." So I want to thank Dr. Winfrey, Chris Winfrey, for being on the show today. Like I said, there's so many things you brought up that we could have come across. We can go deeper into, the mental side of Lyme. You've given us a great understanding of why it happens. Unfortunately, so many people struggle with that, and it leads to, a crisis of faith or whatever it might be, and leads to, unfortunately, a lot of unhappiness and a lot of loss. I want to thank you again for being on the show. Again, if you're listening to this on Apple, give us a 5-star review. If you're watching this on YouTube, give us a thumbs up. Dr. Winfrey, thank you so much the for the content that you've provided today, for the work that you've done with, I don't know, tens of thousands of Lyme survivors, I guess, all through the years that you've served. Give us one final thought. What's one thing you wish that every Lyme survivor struggling with this ridiculous disease knew or believed?
I have strong faith and I believe till the cows come home, and I'm very optimistic. And I think that's one of the best qualities and traits that I like about myself. Um, and I think that there are currently about 8 billion people on Earth. And I think this is the best time to be alive at any point in history. I think for anybody who can fathom the belief that um, a resolution is not possible, or that there's no treatment that will help them. I don't care what stage of the treatment you've been through or how long you've been in it. I think it's an art, and it's not just a science. It's how you put it together and how you connect the pieces. And being in a relationship is where you find healing. It ain't just the modulation of biology. Healing happens in relationships. And so I think having the right relationships and the right artistry to this approach is key. But out of 8 billion people on earth, somebody knows something. I refuse to believe that we don't have the answers that we need to resolve these issues. I think it's about how we communicate, how we relate, how we put it together that makes it possible. But out of 8 billion people, I don't for a second believe we can't get this done.
Absolutely. All right. Once again, I want to thank Dr. Chris Winfrey for being on today's Love, Hope, Lyme podcast. My name is Fred Diamond.